Chris, I've been looking forward to this greatly, just partly by having seen some of your publications and then having looked at something of your life. There's an awful lot to talk about it, but so I'll stop talking, otherwise we won't hear from you. And you were born and brought up in Surrey, and then you went to Charterhouse School. So did you go as a day boy or as a boarder?
Oh no, I went as a boarder actually. Yes, in fact, I boarded before that from the age of 8, up in Broadstairs, a place called Wellesley House, and then I went to Charterhouse, and yes, I had I was used to boarding by then, which was a good thing.
Right. Yeah, and Wellesley House. So, is that relating somehow to the Duke of Wellington's family? Or?
Yes, originally, that's right. Yes, but it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a. I didn't really enjoy my first years, I have to say, of boarding school. Quite traumatic, really. And funnily enough, when my eldest child Matilda reached the age of 8, it struck me rather. I was rather horrified to remember the fact that at that very age I was sent off to boarding school myself, because the idea of packing your child off at the age of 8 certainly struck me as a parent to be quite a difficult thing to have to do, or to choose.
I'm sure. Yes, we all of ours went to day schools, so we didn't have that thing. But I think one of the things that decided us was it was going to be, we couldn't quite face the thought of them being sort of snatched away. But anyway, all that time sort of boarding, as it were, prepared you well for that university that sits out there in the marshes. But I can never remember the name of it now. It may be. You were at Peterhouse, Cambridge.
I was at Peterhouse. That's right. Yes.
And you read history.
I read history under Maurice Cowling. I don't know if that name means anything to you or to any of your viewers, but he was quite an inspirational man, very interesting man, and quite difficult to get on with, but we got on very well. So that was a good thing. Our supervisions were usually at about 10:30 in the evening, with a bottle of whiskey. That's tended to be how things went, but it was very creative, actually. Yeah, it was. Yeah. I had a good time. Yeah.
And I can't remember, you were saying at some point that who else did Maurice Cowling tutor? There were one or two other well-known people, I think.
Well, there was a kind of Peterhouse right-wing set, I suppose. People like Portillo and Peregrine Worsthorne. Funnily enough, my first ever job was as a researcher for Perry Worsthorne, who was then the editor of the Sunday Telegraph. And he hired me to help research his memoirs called Peregrinations. And that was quite a colourful period of his life. He just met Lucinda Lambton and they got married whilst I was doing all of that. And he used to invite me to meetings at the Garrick Club, which is where he spent most of his time. And I remember when I first went into the bar at the Garrick Club, he said, "Ah, Christopher, good to see you. What would you like to drink?" And I sort of modestly said, "Oh, I'll have I don't know, a glass of wine or something, thank you." And then everybody else in the room had chosen a glass of champagne. So next time I went, he said, "Oh, Christopher, what would you like to drink?" I said, "I'll have a glass of champagne." He said, "Oh, very good," And I was one of the gang. And,
Brilliant. Okay, and then. After Cambridge, did you carry on to do research degrees, or did you go straight into doing other things after Cambridge?
Well, I was tempted to, actually. I was offered to do a PhD, but I decided I really wanted to sort of move on and get a career. And I was fortunate, having done that research project with Perry, then to get a job at the Sunday Times as a trainee. And I then went to City University Journalism College under Linda Christmas, who ran it at the time, and then spent 2 or 3 years on the Sunday Times as a news reporter, and then became the science and technology correspondent, which is a bit of a strange segue, you might think, from history. But Andrew Neil was the editor at the time, and I was the first person in the newsroom, this is in 1990, ever to be seen with a laptop. And I had this laptop which could do a spreadsheet and all these other things, and I was showing everybody how to use this. And Andrew Neil came down, and he was really taken by this whole thing, and he anointed me as the technology correspondent on the spot. So so there we are. You never know what's around the corner, do you? Really? But oddly enough, that set me up for a kind of career, a very cross-curricular career. So, read history, became the technology correspondent, and it's sort of carried on, sort of, converging ever since.
And then one of the things that I noticed is that one of your great inspirations. Now, was it your grandfather?
Well, no, my great uncle. Yes,
Great-uncle.
there's a little bit of a family lineage which I've sort of has become of great interest to me, really, given my own career in publishing. Is my great grandfather actually established a printing and publishing business called Nathaniel Lloyd, and this was a printers in Blackfriars. And he set it up with his brother, who was my great uncle, Robin. And Uncle Robin became the sort of leading light in the business, and Nathaniel rather retired to become an architect. And he bought a house, which again some of your viewers and may know, called Great Dixter, down in East Sussex.
Oh yes, yeah.
And he renovated it with his great friend Edwin Lutyens, and he became very keen on architecture, and he wrote some books, actually, the history of English brickwork and the history of the English house, became real classics by Nathaniel Lloyd. But his brother Robin ran the publishing and printing business, Nathaniel Lloyd, and so I've just discovered became a stationer in 1918, and then joined the court in 1948. And then in his will, when he died in 1958, he made a bequest to the company, and there are 4 rather splendid silver goblets that have been made as a result of his bequest. So I haven't seen them yet, but I'm really quite keen to do that. But he was a fascinating man, a great collector, and he collected Japanese swords, jade, beetles, and Turner watercolors, of all things. And he left all his Turner watercolors to the British Museum, and there were about, I think, 150 of them or something, which is an incredible kind of legacy, really. But I found some of the things they printed at Nathaniel Lloyd, and I'd love to just show them to you very quickly, if I may.
Yeah, please do. Yes.
Because again, some people may find this of interest. This is a picture of Great Dixter in 1910, when Nathaniel first purchased it, and it was redeveloped with Lutyens as a sort of ideal home. There's Nathaniel at his desk, doing his architecture and all the rest of it, and his drawings. But this was a leaflet that I found at Dixter of Nathaniel Lloyd, and they promote themselves as striking poster printers. And this is a sort of flyer of all their different customers. You can see OXO there, and you can see, Hose, and you can see all sorts of different advertisements. Of course, in these days, there was no kind of color photography. So everything was hand drawn by illustrators, and they had a whole team of illustrators to do these types of things. Like Maserati tea, I think that's a lovely. Some of them weren't terribly politically correct, as you can see here, the Simplex poster. And this was a rather wonderful one of your luggage, sir, of the Old Orkney Special Scotch, and Glen Aldie's Scottish whiskey. There seemed to be a bit of a theme with whiskey. I love this one. Still making giant strides as we go over the Giant's Causeway with Corrie's Belfast Ginger Ale. Oh yes, and there was Robin, and these are these were the silver goblets I've discovered that were are now belong to the stationers as a result of Robin's bequest there. So anyway, just a few little stories that actually had this opportunity to talk with you was unearthed, really. So it's nice to be able to share them.
Brilliant, and I have indeed sipped from at least 2 of the goblets. The
underwarden, good. Yes.
Yeah, the underwarden and the upperwarden. I was wondering whether they were those ones. I haven't. Yes. I don't think sipped from the Masters one. I may have done about once, because of course we spent most of our time locked up in our own houses, as I describe it, in captivity.
Yes.
Right. Well, that's really interesting. And then, so you went to News International when, in which year? 1990.
Yeah, 1990. That's right. Yes.
Yeah. And now, and who were you working for then at News International?
Well, when I was on the editorial side, it was Andrew Neil.
Neil, yeah.
And then after that, John Witherow. And then I moved into the online side. We took the Times and Sunday Times online. As I was technology correspondent, I was responsible for the editorial side of that. And we did a joint venture with BT and United News and Media for an online service. And then I went into the marketing side latterly under Les Hinton, who was the CEO of News International. and did various different business development projects, and left there in 2000. So I spent 10 years in all at News. And
was it then that you went to immersive education?
Yes, and I mean, it was a quite key decision point, really. I'd spent 10 years in newspapers, and I kind of remember looking around the newsroom and looking around the place, seeing quite a few people sort of approaching their pensionable age, thinking, am I going to be still here in 30 years' time, or am I going to actually, move on and try something else? And then an opportunity came up for me to run a publishing company in Oxford. So I grabbed it, really. I thought that this would be an amazing experience, and it was. So for 5 years, we built this publishing company focused on education publishing, but also technology, trying to take the technologies and the engagement values of what make children enjoy computer games and make them into a pedagogical outcome that would work in a school environment. A really difficult challenge. I still don't think that's been properly kind of understood yet. Probably.
It's interesting that you were worried that there were so many of not quite pensionable age that you wouldn't move on, because I remember I every now and again do an article for the Times. I went across to go and meet with the journalists there, and their fear was exactly the opposite. That Monday morning they might be most of their friends would be doing something else. If you know what I mean.
Well, you were always slightly worried, I remember, in the newsroom at Sunday Times as to whether you would have a chair the next week or have a job, especially if your article didn't get in the newspaper, because being a Sunday journalist meant that you had spent all week working on your story. And in those days, the paper went through 12 editions on a Saturday night. And I used to go up to the press halls watching the papers coming in. It was just magical, isn't it? It's like amazing to see them all being printed. And I'd worked all week on a story, and it would be there, and I could look at it, and then I'd go home to my flat in London, and then the next morning I'd pick up the paper, the London edition, look for my story, and it would have disappeared completely because, some trivial thing happened over the night, and the night news editor would have thrown out my story and put in something else instead. So it was only available to readers in Cornwall or something like that,
Yeah.
But still, there we are.
And immersive education is a wonderful title, isn't it? But once people have immersed themselves, presumably they immersed through digital media or?
Well, the idea was to say, well, if children love playing computer games, how can we learn from the engagement values and the techniques used to make them just as passionate about, learning what teachers want them to learn in school? And I suppose I learned an awful lot about what computers can do well and what they can do badly. And I learned that, a computer is like an amplifier. And if your environment lends itself to productivity and well-being and motivation, and you computerize it, doesn't matter whether in your business or school or in your own home life, you'll become very much more productive. If you don't like your job, or you don't like the product you're making, or you don't like the teacher and you don't like the subject, and you give them computers, then they become 100 times less productive, because of course it's a channel to be able to doing things that you're not supposed to be targeted on much more easily. So I did learn a great deal actually at Immersive about the dangers and the benefits of digital technology, but I also learned that the real value of engaging the student is about giving them control of the narrative, which is something traditional education struggles with. It's very much led by the teacher, led by a curriculum, led by a syllabus, led by, the fact they're going to have to take an exam. Whereas with a computer game, you decide where you're going to go next. Do you want to turn left? Do you want to turn right? Do you want to go up? Do you want to go down? Do you want to, and it's that sense of agency that's so powerful to the individual. How can we give them that sense of agency in learning? So actually at Immersive, we developed a platform called Cartouche, where we would teach Shakespeare by giving the student the chance to be the director of the play. And this is the right perspective to really give them that sense of engagement. You give them the characters, give them the backgrounds, give them the props, give them the chance to direct the scene. And then it's really up to their own interpretation, their imagination, their creativity. And in order to be able to construct the scene, they really need to understand the play and the characters and the thoughts and the speech and everything else. And I'm still to this day, and everything I do with our publishing company, it's about trying to engage with children and adults too, and give them that sense of agency and control over the narratives that they are weaving. And if you can do that, then I think your natural curiosity just takes over.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And did you were really as much responsible as others getting immersive education, building it up and growing the company, were you?
Yes, I mean, I spent 5 years there really learning a great deal about how to raise money, how to run a team, and how to try and develop the business through partnerships.
So were you based in Oxford then?
Yes, based in Oxford. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Where in the centre of Oxford was that all?
In Paradise Street, just behind the castle.
Oh, yes, right. Yeah.
Around there.
The castle, of course, now is sort of,
yes.
Well, sort of ditzy restaurants and things.
Yeah, it wasn't like that when I was there. It was it was no prison, I think.
Yeah, indeed. I've even eaten in a prison. It's extraordinary. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, amazing.
And was it a great culture shock to have to come from the place in the marshes across to the place on the banks of the river Isis?
No comparison.
No comparison.
Give me the marshes any day.
Give you what?
Give me the marshes any day.
Yeah, well, I might be saying something rather different, but then there may be good reasons for that, of course.
That's all right. Yes, of course.
It depends on where you've actually started, and yeah.
I think so. No, I mean, I loved Oxford, and I was very lucky because I live in Kent. I had to stay up in Oxford usually a couple of nights a week because the commute was just horrendous. And yes. I had a great friend I was introduced to who lives in Parktown, which is very nice. So I used to stay there for a couple of nights a week. And then so that was very civilized and lovely. But eventually the commute from Kent to Oxford with the young family at the time was too much. It was about 2.5 hours each way, and I'd be the first person to leave home, last person to arrive in Oxford, and the first person to leave and the last person to get home. And after a while you just think, hang on a minute, this can't be right. So
and from there, where did you go from there then, Chris?
Well, then we had a rather unexpected, but in hindsight, very transformative moment when our eldest daughter, Matilda, who was then 7 or 8, got fed up with going to school. She loved school until she changed year groups. And then she was given mind-numbingly boring things to do by her teacher just to keep her quiet because she was good at maths and English. And the teacher was focusing all her time on the ones that needed her help to get through the tests. And this taught me another amazing thing, really. You know, what's good for the individual may not be what's right for the herd or the institution. And the teacher was doing what teachers are supposed to do, get as many pupils through the test. But for Matilda, there was no point going to school because she couldn't follow her interests. She was given boring things to do. She got cross with us, her parents, because we were responsible for sending her to school. And obviously, as a parent, you want to try and intervene and find the right solution for your child.
And was this when you had a sabbatical and took 3 months off and went
it sort of all happened that way because we decided to try and find another school. We ended up home educating, not really knowing what we were doing or why, except that we didn't want to choose another wrong school for her. And we thought, how much more damage can we do in a year when she's fed up anyway? And the first 3 months of that home educating experience were an absolute catastrophe. It was just like the end of Shakespeare's Hamlet after 3 months in our house. You know, we were all at each other's throat. What we did was instinctively we created a schoolroom at home. You know, we had a library and a syllabus and a timetable and a clock and we thought we could do in 2 months what you could do in 2 years at school. We thought it'd be brilliant. And it was a complete catastrophe. And it was only after about 2 or 3 months in our desperation, we sat down with Matilda and we said, Matilda, just tell us, what are you interested in, for heaven's sake, you know? And then when she told us, when we gave her just a moment to tell us her interests, everything changed. She said she was interested in penguins. I mean, who isn't interested in penguins? But anyway, she loved penguins. So we went to London Zoo, we saw the penguins. She did a project on Antarctica, which is, of course, where penguins come from, which used to be on the equator, you know, in the days of Pangaea. And we learn about, you know, plate tectonics. And she wants to find out about how they keep warm on the South Pole. And we have big groups and little groups of penguins. And we do our maths through penguins and ratios and division. And then she says, why did the penguin leave that group and go to that group? And I'm just thinking, well, just count up the penguins. And she's thinking about whether the penguin was bullied or whether it was fell in love with another penguin, and then she starts writing a story about it, and then she wants to find out about ice and the fact that when you melt it, it disappears and changes state, and then stories about ice, and we learn about the Titanic and about irony and arrogance and poems about penguins. And it was a huge wake-up call to me. I thought we were teaching the children, but what I learned was that you can learn anything you like through penguins. In fact, you can learn all the skills you need through anything, provided you give a child an environment where they can follow their curiosity. And
so where did this lead you to next then, Chris?
So that led me to, I thought, well, I gave up the job in Oxford. I took a year off. I thought if I retire, I would rather retire when I'm 75 than not take this year off now whilst the children are young. And these extraordinary sort of revelations are happening about how we learn. And so we bought a camper van and we went off traveling for 4 months around Europe. And it was on that trip that I decided I wanted to get writing again, but not to go back into journalism. And I, again, had my own kind of slight Damoclean moment when I realized I had no idea how old the age of the Earth is. I was doing the washing up at a campsite in Rome. In fact, I wrote about this in the preface to one of my books recently. And I realized I just didn't know how old the Earth was. And I mean, presumably, Stephen, if I ask you how old is the planet Earth, you can rattle off a number for me, can you?
No, I think I'd hand it back to you again.
Well, this is what I found out. Everybody I asked, they said, well, I don't know. And I didn't know if it was 4,000, 40,000, 4 million, 4 billion, 4 trillion, you know, but it's a very well-established fact, you know. And when I discovered it's 4.6 billion years old, I thought, how many other really important things don't I know? So I wanted a book that would go all the way from the beginning of time to the present day to fill in all the gaps of the things that I wasn't taught at school or that were missing, that you know, would help me kind of contextualize information. And I went into a bookshop and I asked for a history of the world, and I could either go into the science section, it would all be about nature, or the history section, all be about people. None of them combined them together. So I thought, I'll have a go at writing a book that literally goes from the beginning of time to the present day. And so I did that, and it took me a couple of years, and I was fortunate to get a publisher, which was Bloomsbury, and it turned into this book here, actually. I don't think you've got that one, called What?
No, I haven't. No. I'll show you a couple of other ones, isn't it? You may have seen yourself.
But that's what set me off on my writing career anyway, was a book to try and connect knowledge together again. You know, your brain isn't divided into subjects or into A to Z. It's all connected. So why don't we teach things in a more connected way? Now,
when did the Magna Carta intrude itself into all this?
Well, I wrote these books for Bloomsbury. Then I wanted to create a set of children's books that would all also connect knowledge together. So we did this series of timeline books where you can visualize information and you can read them in as a normal book like this. But I thought I'll take that book, What on Earth Happened, and do it as a timeline, and let's spread it out on the wall or on the floor and have the history of the world in 1,000 moments. So I did a whole series of those with publishers partners like the Natural History Museum and the Science Museum and the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. We did all the Shakespeare plays and the National Trust for the History of Britain. And then in 2014, Sir Robert Worcester, who was the chairman of the Magna Carta 800th Committee, approached me to say, would I consider doing a children's book that would tell the story of freedom and rights over 800 years from 1215 to 2015 as part of the Magna Carta 800th. And of course, I jumped on that opportunity, and I was working with an illustrator, Andy Forshaw, and we created a book for that occasion called the Magna Carta Chronicle.
Now, then you've moved on much more recently to Britannica, who used to publish the encyclopedia. And I'm going to just show people a couple of books that you very kindly sent me, which I can assure you will find a very good home, a couple of generations down, as it were, very soon. But as soon as we're allowed to move around again. Here we are. Here's, first of all,
yes.
I will just show them, and then people can actually, you can say a bit about this. Absolutely everything. Beautifully produced, fantastic cover.
Yep.
And of course, the most important thing is the inside, and some of the some lovely. There we are. And there's also very smart. This book has got its own ribbon in it. But then also,
yes, you don't get lost. Yeah.
Yes, and then we go to the Children's Encyclopedia.
Yeah.
And again, fantastic visual material in it. Well, there we are. The Leaning Tower of Pisa.
You are.
It's on its side almost at the moment. There we are. There we are. There we're in space now, I think, and so on. Anyway, say a little bit about that, Chris, about this move towards Britannica and.
Yes, well, funny, that book you showed, absolutely everything, is a sort of children's version of the first book I waved up, What on Earth Happened. I wanted to write it as a children's book, but Bloomsbury wanted it as an adult book. And it wasn't until I'd set up What on Earth Publishing, my publishing house now, that we had the chance to sort of turn it into a children's narrative. So again, it starts at the beginning of time, goes to the present day, but tells it as a story. A lot of people think non-fiction books are reference books, and they, but the real world is more amazing than anything you can make up. And I often say that in my lectures at schools and festivals and things, and a lot of people agree. And the best stories are often true stories. So non-fiction, I think, is a really important part of the literary diet for young people. Anyway, so that book, whilst I was on a book tour in the States in 2018, I was introduced to the folks that run, the folks, I say folks because they're Americans, that run Britannica, and they're based in Chicago. And we just hit it off, and they wanted to start publishing again. Britannica, published encyclopedias from 1768. In fact, I've got a facsimile here of one of the volumes of, I've but all three of the original 1768 encyclopedia published by William Smellie in Edinburgh, as it happens. But they abandoned print publishing in 2012, and everything went online and digital. But I think they began to realize a few years later, by the time we met, that children's nonfiction is a very vibrant, growing part of publishing, and that having the Britannica brand in print is really important, because that's the way in which the brand was established. For parents and grandparents will remember it very well. And so they wanted to create a new publishing imprint, and rather than start from scratch, because they didn't have anybody themselves to do it, they wanted to find a partner. And so we became that partner, and we established Britannica Books. We launched it really just last year with the first two titles. The first one you've shown there, an all-new children's encyclopedia, What We Know and What We Don't. So the idea is you don't go to an encyclopedia just to find out what you don't know. We will also to find out what isn't known, and it's all about that curiosity. And it's not designed as A to Z, it's designed as a journey through the history of the world. So a few different things about trying to modernize the concept of an encyclopedia, but still make it a book of wonder for young people.
Now, I think I probably ought to bring this towards a close, because otherwise I'm hopeless at keeping time on these things. But what you have alerted me to is the thing we need to do as soon as we can find a slot for it. We must see if you will be prepared to do one of these literary evenings with Mike James and Peter Day and so on, because we've just touched the surface in doing this. And if you had an hour of conversation with
pleasure.
Peter, so it's been marvelous. And I suppose the thing that one of the things I'm quite keen on, some of my family get a bit fed up with it, is energy, and having plenty of energy to do lots of things. Well, you are actually the exemplification of energy, not only in terms of literal physical energy, but I mean in terms of intellectual energy and publishing and business and so on. So that's fantastic, and we're extremely lucky to have yet another generation of Lloyds as stationers. And as I say, I'm sure Mike James will be watching this at some point, and I think he'll probably be on the email to you very soon indeed. Chris, thank you very much. So much.
We're delighted. Thank you, Stephen, for having me. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.